In this video, we're going to focus on evaluating performance. Now, employees that we've hired into our organization, we've trained them so we know that they have the skill set needed. We now have to assess their performance ultimately. And this serves a number of different purposes, right? I mean, initially, this obviously serves kind of an administrative purpose for the kind of purpose of salary reviews, for retention, for termination, those types of things, right? We're trying to get a picture of the employee's level of performance, and so evaluating performance will allow us to do those things to determine who gets a raise and who doesn't, and who's up for promotion and who shouldn't be, right? It also serves a developmental purpose too, and the important thing of the appraisal process is that we can give feedback to employees on how they're performing and identify maybe some areas of improvement, or we can identify maybe some opportunities for additional training. If the employee is having issues in a certain particular area, we can obviously recommend training to help improve performance in that individual area. And so that's the basic function of the performance appraisal process. Now, how we do that typically is a number of different things. Usually there is some type of evaluation process. Usually a written assessment will be involved at some point. And so usually you see some type of written assessment. Commonly looks like a questionnaire. Most employers use that. Maybe they rate your performance or your behavior in certain areas on scales of, let's say, 1 to 5. So it's a Likert type scale, 5 being strongly agree, and 1 being strongly disagree. Let's say that, for example. And it's the extent to which you engage in certain types of behaviors on the job. And so they tally the scores, and based upon the final summed score, they put you into a certain bracket, either if you're at target or not, or different terminology is obviously used in different organizations. So that is usually some type of element of the performance evaluation process, is that kind of written assessment, which can be a ranking system. I've seen some organizations that they simply just rank their employees from highest to poorest performer, which is one way of doing it, right? Simply a numbered system. Probably don't want to let your employees know that, but it is one element of doing that. You can do other types of force distribution methods or paired comparison methods. There's a number of different things you can do, but usually what they all also encompass, besides that written assessment, is you also have some type of face-to-face interaction. And this is really an important part here, in which you review with the employee, the elements of the appraisal, right? What you found, what was the behavior like, and ultimately, what is the action that's going to be taken, what's the recommendation, those different types of things. It's a very important process, and if you've been a part of this process, you've realized that it can be a little nerve-wracking, either if you're on, the employee side, but obviously for the employer as well. As much as we like to think that the appraisal process is effective, there's a wide body of research that supports that it really is very ineffective for a number of different reasons. The first of which, you talk about the frequency of the process. If you're like most people, your appraisal is typically done on a yearly basis. Maybe 6 months, but it's typically on a yearly basis. And so, is it enough on a yearly basis for you to really change your behavior? Probably not. And the reason is, if you're behaving a certain way, you're performing a certain way, and it's wrong, but nobody says anything for an entire year, wouldn't you be a little frustrated? I certainly would, because there probably were opportunities to change the behavior in that year span. Unfortunately, the appraisal process isn't frequent enough for there really to be effective feedback, right? Feedback is most effective when given immediately after the behavior is engaged in, because it sticks, right? In an appraisal, when you're going over your evaluation, you say, 3 months ago you did this. You're like, I don't remember what I had for breakfast 3 days ago, let alone what I did, several weeks ago or several months ago. So the duration of time, the lapse there that happens, reduces the effectiveness of it, which is a very, very big issue. The other criticism of performance appraisals, it has to deal with observation. Specifically, it's management's observation of you and what your work performance was like. And so if you're like most people, how many times can your manager truly observe your behavior in a given setting? Right? I mean, maybe some of you unfortunately have the pleasure of your manager, supervising and observing every behavior that you do, but for most of us, right, that's a very big time commitment. And so that really doesn't happen. And so maybe in some jobs, you don't see your manager or supervisor really at all. And now they're going to base an evaluation off of maybe a few specific instances in which they observe you behave a certain way, and they're going to assume that ultimately your behavior is like that all the time. And that's probably inaccurate. And so to think that we can make or develop a certain conclusion or inference based upon what it is that we see in a very, very small setting, and then extrapolate that and assume that's how you act all the time, is fairly naive, and unfortunately doesn't happen all the time. Now, to kind of combat this observation issue, some employers develop what we call the 360 degree performance appraisal, and I'll abbreviate performance appraisal as PA. And what that is you get feedback, or you get an evaluation from not only your supervisor, but also from your employees, your fellow employees, your colleagues, also customers. And so we're trying to get feedback from multiple different areas just to evaluate the accuracy of it and the validity of it. So if we get, obviously, as the employer, if I observe, hey, everything's great, everything looks fantastic, right, based upon the 2 times that I saw you, but your colleagues are saying, well, there's some issues here, customers are expressing the same thing, right, I get more valid information that way as opposed to relying on just a few simple observations. Much more effective. Now, much more time consuming, of course, but if you're trying to get valid and accurate information, this is a good way to go about it because you're taking in the perspectives of multiple different people here. Another issue with performance appraisals is that they're very much so prone to politics. Even when we don't like to say they are, they certainly are. And there was some research done not too long ago by a gentleman by the name of Samuel Cuthbert, and he wrote a book titled Get Rid of the Performance Review, so you immediately know kind of what his position is on the matter. And he did some research and determined just the level of politics that were engaged in. So he did some kind of fact-finding and talked to different human resource practitioners and people involved in the appraisal process, and determined that a wide majority of them used the performance appraisal process to actually advance their own agenda in some way, shape, or form. So, for example, some were cited as using the performance appraisal as a way of shocking employees to kind of wake them up to their poor performance. And so they gave them maybe an overly negative performance appraisal as a way of kind of shocking them so that they would wake up to their poor performance and hopefully turn things around. That's one element. Another is certain practitioners who knew that employees weren't performing as well as they had in the past, but were obviously going through some personal matters, maybe lost a family member, something of a personal nature that was affecting performance. They were more inclined to give more kind of optimistic reviews because they knew what they were going through and they were generally a good employee. Okay? Another interesting thing is that employers are more prone to give kind of positive reviews, especially when money is attached to it, right? If I have to work with this person and I want to make sure they get a raise so they're happy because I essentially have to live with them, kind of. I'm more prone to make those changes and make the numbers work so that there is some type of monetary reward because I know that I eventually, have to interact with them on a daily basis and I have to work with them, so I have to continue that particular relationship. And so those are just a few of the many different types of things that get introduced into the appraisal process. Now, obviously, like anything, it's not perfect, but generally, I think for the most part, there is some effectiveness, but there are some weaknesses to it that certainly have to be changed, like the frequency of feedback, right? Feedback should be given on a continual basis, not just during a yearly kind of sit down. So those are some of the elements of the performance appraisal process or the performance evaluation process, along with obviously maybe some of the weaknesses and criticisms of it. Hopefully that gives you a better understanding of that particular area.